BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. This time, bird flu is back. Many farmers are having to house their birds, and one free-range egg producer tells us at the moment it's much safer that way.
People talk about biosecurity, so we'll change clothing twice. When the chickens go outside, do they dip their feet and change their feathers every time they go in and out? No.
First, public money for public goods. That was the slogan as the Conservative government launched its vision for farm support in England after Brexit back in 2020. Public goods are the things society wants farmers to provide on top of food. Wildlife habitats, clean water, healthy soil. It's a long list. Well, this week we're examining how post-Brexit farm payments are developing in each part of the UK. In England, the old EU payments based on land area are being phased out entirely and replaced by the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which has a vast number of different ways farmers can join in, including the entry-level Sustainable Farming Incentive, or SFI. Sarah Swadling has been finding out how it's working with beef producer and farm consultant Rob Halliday on his farm near Menheniot in Cornwall.
This is very typical of Cornish countryside, undulating ground, lots of hedges, smaller fields, and very much suited to livestock and livestock rearing.
How do you get the money under SFI, the Sustainable Farming Incentive then? What sort of things can you be doing to earn the money?
So there's quite a wide range of options now, everything from producing environmental plans for the farm, hedgerow management plans, hedgerow maintenance and management itself, and then there's money for doing things like planting bird feed or, in our case, quite a lot of herbal lays, a mixture of grasses, legumes and herbs, so things like chicory and plantain.
How does that help?
Well, it's certainly been very beneficial in terms of probably a more mixed diet for the animals that are eating it. Probably more in the way of soil activity, there's deeper rooting, so it's hopefully improving soil structure over time. And also there's a variety of different flowering plants in there, so encouraging birds and bees onto the farm.
If we look at this hedge then, Rob, it's quite tall, it's got a bit of spindly growth on top. Have you been managing this as part of the Sustainable Farming Incentive? So
this hedgerow was under countryside stewardship, which we've just come out of at the end of last year and will now be rolled into our new SFI agreement. And that will probably carry on the same basis of every other year cutting. We are selecting where we can find them in the hedge, any good quality hardwoods, oaks particularly, to try and grow into hedgerow trees.
How do they calculate what you can earn from doing that? Is it sort of pounds or pennies per yard?
So the hedgerow management option will be paid £13 per 100 metres per side of the hedge. And we've got just over 11 kilometres of hedgerow on this farm. We have only used the schemes where they effectively bolt on and improve our business. We haven't substituted our production because fundamentally I believe that in the future we need to make sure that we have a productive business at our core. It's enabled us to enhance some of our intrinsic value, some of our valley bottoms, our hedgerows, the easier wins, but also hopefully improve some of our livestock health along the way.
Are those easy wins for you, the farmer, or are they easy wins for nature?
I think they're probably easy wins for both because they're effectively here, and we have to get away from this dichotomy of it's either food or nature. The two are very much intertwined.
The Sustainable Farming Incentive is like a massive menu with everything on it. Mm-hmm. Is that a strength or a weakness?
It's both. Farms are not homogenous. You know, if you take us to Hampshire to the Fens, the cross section is huge. So I think you need to have the options to enable it to fit individual farms. Of course, the inherent problem with having lots of options is it becomes ever more complicated. And so probably for farmers to dip in and sign up to the scheme is quite hard work because there's an awful lot of background learning. So it is, to a point, still an agent's charter. And it would be nice to try and see if we could have the scheme to run, you know, for farmers by farmers.
Well, one thing that I ought to mention is that, as well as being a farmer, you are also a consultant, so you help farmers apply. I'm
fairly upfront, even as a consultant, that I would rather see the money in the pockets of the farmers. I am a farmer first and foremost, and ultimately for delivery, that is where the money should go. Now, part of the problem we've had is with various iterations of SFI, there's come new coding with every iteration.
And when you say codes, that's the little numbers that you have to put in the box when you do the form.
So Herbal Lay, for instance, has had 3 different codes even since we were in our mid-tier scheme. So you think you're applying for one thing and then you find, well, you can't find the code you're looking for, and that's because the codes have changed. So I understand that obviously there's the scheme is going to evolve and there's going to be changes, but it is complicated to try and take it all on board and digest.
Rob Halliday there. Well, DEFRA told us we're making sure our schemes work for farmers, engaging with the sector to hear feedback on how we can make them simpler to navigate while ensuring they deliver the most benefit for food security and nature. Bird flu cases are on the rise, but action is being taken to try to prevent its spread. All poultry keepers across England and Scotland must increase biosecurity. Meanwhile, where actual outbreaks have occurred across eastern England, from Yorkshire down through Lincolnshire, Norfolk and Suffolk, all birds must be kept indoors, including backyard flocks. That housing order now applies also to an area in Shropshire following an outbreak there. I've been to visit David Perrone of Top Farm Eggs in North Norfolk, who restocked his chicken and quail sheds after losing all his birds in 2023 because of a bird flu outbreak on the farm. His usually free-range birds are now shut in their sheds, but a change in the rules means their eggs can still be sold as free-range for the duration of the housing order. Previously, after 16 weeks inside, the eggs would have had to have been labelled as barn eggs.
This is about as near as we'd like to get, really for biosecurity reasons.
Well, we're standing a good distance from the sheds where David Perrone has his layers.
I think the argument for housing can be odd because the biggest case so far has been in Shropshire, and that was all housed birds because they were barn eggs. And it makes the argument for housing weaker. I mean, people talk about biosecurity, so we have a change of footwear when we go into the egg packing station, into the egg collecting room, and then we have another set of clothing we go into the actual shed. So we'll change clothing twice. When the chickens go outside, do they dip their feet and change their feathers every time they go in and out? No. I think by housing them, you reduce the risk of bird flu by about 50%. You don't eliminate it, but you reduce it.
You're normally free range. They're now housed. Are you still allowed to call them free range, the eggs?
Yes, we are, because we were free range prior to the housing order.
Well, it's just started raining. We were just going back in the farmhouse. What is the difference in the payments that you get for a free range egg and for a barn egg? So
It's about 20 to 30 pence a dozen.
That's quite a lot, isn't it?
It is a lot of money. We would have had 8 pallets of eggs go this morning, each with 720 dozen on, and that will happen twice a week.
That's an awful lot of eggs, so it makes a huge difference, doesn't
That's
it?
just how we're paid for the risk, and that's what needed to happen. Before bird flu, lots of people were going out of free-range eggs. We were thinking about it, but what's actually happened is it's actually, with that shortage of eggs, after the original bird flu, I know supermarkets blamed it on bird flu, but it wasn't, because they didn't pay us enough money.
We reported that on our programme. We had an awful lot of news about the egg industry saying, hang on a minute, the payments that we're getting for eggs is not enough. But you feel now you are being paid
We are
properly.
being paid enough. We've gone from, I think we would have averaged about 86, 87 pence a dozen 2.5 years ago, and we're now paid £1.50.
What would you say to farmers? What can they do to prevent the disease occurring on their farms?
You have to minimise the chances of it getting in. Do something to scare wild birds away. If only all you do is stop pigeons and seagulls sitting down on the top of your roof.
We heard about a person who was infected with avian flu, who'd been in close contact with birds over a prolonged period. Does that worry you?
It's got to worry you, and you've got to be aware. Will it stop me doing what I do for a living? No.
So what about your staff who go into the sheds and look after the birds?
The main people who do the chickens are my 2 sons, and because of what they went through and they saw what it involved, I don't have to tell them anything about biosecurity. In fact, especially my youngest son, Henry, will tell me for doing something I shouldn't do. But also, don't think it can't happen to you. And that's what I would say to any person, whether you've had it before or not had it before, think it can happen to you.
David Perrone at Top Farm Eggs in Norfolk. So how much of a worry should avian flu be for people after the UK Health Security Agency, or UKHSA, confirmed a case in a person on Monday? Professor James Wood is a veterinary epidemiologist from the University of Cambridge. He told me it's very unusual for people to contract bird flu.
We've had hundreds of outbreaks on poultry farms over the last 4 or 5 years in the UK, and despite really stringent follow-up from UKHSA, who've been doing clinical monitoring and actually a lot of testing, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, this is only about the 7th case overall that we've had.
As we've reported on this programme, there have been cases of avian flu in people in the United States. Is this the same thing?
What we've got here is actually an entirely different scenario. It's only linked by the fact that we're calling it bird flu. It is a really rather different strain. How
would we tell if someone had it?
The only way that you'd know for sure that you had bird flu is if the UKHSA came and took a sample from you, found a virus in it, and then analysed the virus and demonstrated it was bird flu. The very few people that have had symptoms of bird flu, there's nothing very specific about their signs at all, which again is in stark contrast to what we're seeing with the USA in dairy cattle, where people have really severe conjunctivitis with some raised temperatures. I think it's important to emphasise that the very small number of people that have had bird flu in this country have all been really heavily exposed to infected poultry. So unless you're working in the poultry industry, it's not something really you need to worry about at all.
Well, linked to that, the chief vet has said that this particular case in the West Midlands is, and I quote, very specific to the circumstances on this premises. So should farm workers on poultry units be worried about this?
I think in general terms, no. If an outbreak of bird flu is notified to the authorities, then they will be providing very specific advice around the sort of personal protection, the PPE that people should be wearing if they have to go anywhere near the birds. So in general terms, I don't think this is something that poultry workers should be worried about, but everyone should be aware that this is something that could happen.
What about the people who are actually doing the culling on farms where there's been an outbreak?
I think that's a really good question because actually the people who are exposed the most are those who are involved in what you might call clean-up operations on farms that have had bird flu diagnosed. But in those people, not only are they given the highest quality personal protective equipment, but many of them are also given preventive drugs, such as Tamiflu, which will markedly reduce the chances of them getting any influenza infection at all. And if they do get it, then it means that they should be protected from getting particularly unwell with it.
And just to confirm, this doesn't spread from person to person, does it?
This virus, and in particular this strain of virus that we have seen in the UK, has not spread between people. But there is the chance of this virus adapting or recombining with another human seasonal influenza virus to make what you might say is a super virus, and then be able to spread between people. One of the reasons for doing everything that we do around bird flu is to try and make sure that the chances of that happening are minimised.
Professor James Wood from the University of Cambridge. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Heather Simons. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.